Did you know that the table of diversity is updated every 2 years? And that's because how we talk about ourselves and each other from an identity perspective changes so often. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about the two updates that are in the 2025 version of the table of diversity, which is the latest update. So one is in this very first column, the race and ethnicity column, which used to be two separate columns because anytime you fill out a form and it's on race and ethnicity, it's two separate questions, you know? The first question is, what is your race or ethnicity? Second question is the opposite, where you're like, okay, yes, Hispanic, or no, Hispanic, so on and so forth. That update, where it's now combined, is based on the 2030 census. You all heard about that? So in the 2030 census, there's going to be a major update in the questions that are asked regarding race and ethnicity. So instead of it being two questions, it's now going to be one, where race and ethnicity are combined. So I'm not sure if you can see this right here, but this is Hispanic or Latino is now included in race and ethnicity. But then there's also an addition, it's MENA, Middle Eastern and North African. That is now included in the race and ethnicity column, or in that question in the U.S. Census. So why is that important? It's important for the table of diversity because all the things that are happening at a federal level regarding the census, so the updates to race and ethnicity, are going to trickle down to the state level because state reports information to the federal agencies. The state is going to then trickle down all of that information and requirements to the forms that we complete on a regular basis. So for instance, when your organization starts hiring, and as part of the hiring process, they're asking, can you provide us with your race or ethnicity so that we can report that to the EEO? Well, it's going to reflect this, which means how we talk about race and ethnicity is going to change over the next 6-7+ years. The federal regulations are going to start changing next year in preparation for the census. So all of these agencies start in 2025 having to report how they are going to make these changes to all of their documents. And once that gets approved, we might even start seeing these changes go into effect before 2030. I'm anticipating that they will. But organizations are going to have to start preparing for this sooner rather than later. It might not be a big change as it relates to the different forms and systems and things like that. The biggest change is going to be how we talk about it. So that's the first change on the table of diversity. The second change, because now that these two columns are combined, it left almost an opening on the table of diversity. So for the first time ever, there's a brand new column on the table of diversity, which is this one right here, this green column, and that is the justice impacted column. So you can kind of think of that as the justice system. So anyone who's been impacted or has been involved with the justice system. That's another term, justice involved. I chose to use justice impacted instead of justice involved because it impacts way more than the people who are directly involved. It impacts the families, it impacts the communities of people who have been incarcerated or who have been arrested, so on and so forth. So this is the justice impacted column. So it refers to people who have been incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, who are currently in a trial, those who have been arrested, those who are perhaps in pre-trial, so they've been arrested or they've been detained, but they haven't yet gone to trial, or they haven't accepted a plea deal. And then it refers to folks who are being re-entered into society. So they have been released from prison, they have been released from trial, or they've been, released from being arrested, whatever the case may be, but they're re-entering into society. So that we can better understand, what's their experience, in the workplace. But this is not just about work. It's what's their experience in the world. How are they being accepted or re-entered into society, now that they have had this experience. And the research that I've done in adding this column to the table of diversity was very eye-opening, because I knew enough to be dangerous, but didn't know enough to facilitate change. And in doing this research, what we discovered is that 50% of American adults know at least one person who has been impacted by the justice system, who has been arrested or in prison or is currently facing time. And so there are so many things that happen when someone has been arrested, especially if it's a spouse or a partner or a parent. Think about kids who have parents who are incarcerated, the trauma that that introduces. But there's a lasting impact to that, and it is not something that has adequately been covered under the umbrella of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And hopefully, with it being included in the table of diversity, folks who are using this tool, which is lots, will then begin to have conversations around what does this mean in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion. More importantly, how can we create environments, communities, organizations that are aware of the impact of what happens within each of these communities. Another thing that's really important for the Justice Impacted column being where it is that it's right next to the veteran status column. And some more of the research that we found is that those who are incarcerated, the trauma that they are facing, especially in American prisons, is very similar to the trauma that folks face who have gone to war. So them being right next to each other is very intentional, as are all the things on the table of diversity. But that's something that most folks, unless you hear it straight from me and the folks that I've consulted to do this, you wouldn't quite know or understand. So that was a really important thing for us to do, is to put those right next to each other, because in many ways the experience is the same. So that's the 2025 table of diversity. Who needs to see this? What organization, what community group, who needs the table of diversity in their DEI efforts, in the work that they are doing, in their organizational excellence work? Let me know in the comments.